when I blocked off my own land. I never expected an HOA Karen to call the cops on Mallet alone try to take me to court. What started as a simple fence to stop trespassers turned into a full-blown war with an entitled HOA board member who thought she owned my property. She called the police, sent legal threats, and even tried to use the county against me. But she didn't expect me to fight back. Stick around, because this battle of land versus entitlement takes twists you won't believe until karma finally delivers the ultimate payback. The day I moved into my dream home, I never imagined I'd be battling a group of entitled neighbors over my own land. It was supposed to be a peaceful escapist, secluded property with plenty of space, away from the chaos of city life. But what I got instead was a front row seat to the most absurd display of entitlement I'd ever witnessed. It all started with a narrow strip of land that bordered my property. It wasn't paved, but it was clear enough to look like a road, and apparently, that was all the invitation my new neighbors needed. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd see the occasional car rolling across the strip, using it as a shortcut into the nearby HOA neighborhood. I figured maybe it was just habit, something left over from the previous owners. But as the days passed, the traffic didn't stop, it increased. Before I knew it, a steady stream of cars was cutting across my property daily, as if it was their personal access road. I tried to be understanding. Maybe they didn't realize it was private land. Maybe they just needed a gentle reminder. So, I started standing outside when I saw them, giving a friendly wave, hoping they'd take the hint. But instead of stopping, most drivers either ignored me completely or shot me a look that screamed, "What's your problem?" The final straw came one morning when I stepped outside and found deep tire tracks dug into the ground. Someone had turned too sharply, spinning their wheels and tearing up a huge chunk of my yard. That was it. I wasn't about to let my property be destroyed because my neighbors didn't feel like driving an extra minute to the main road. I called the HOA, thinking surely they'd want to address this issue. After all, they were in charge of maintaining order in their community, right? Wrong. They told me, in the most uninterested tone possible, that since the strip of land wasn't part of their jurisdiction, they couldn't do anything about it. Fine. If they weren't going to do anything, I would. I hired a contractor, installed a solid fence, and put up no trespassing signs along the strip. I figured that would be the end of it. But that was before she showed up. The next thing I knew, I was face to face with a woman who clearly thought the world revolved around her. Let's call her Nancy. Nancy was furious. She pulled up to my newly installed gate, laid on the horn, and stood outside her car with her arms crossed, waiting for me to come out. When I finally stepped outside, she marched right up to me, her expression full of righteous indignation. "Are you the one who put this up?" she demanded, pointing at the gate like it was a personal attack. "You need to open it right now. I'm already late." I stared at her for a moment, trying to process the sheer audacity of her demand. She was acting like I had blocked off a public road, not my own private property. "Yes, I put up the gate," I said calmly. "This is my land. I was tired of people trespassing on it." Nancy's face twisted into a scowl. "You can't just do that. This road has been used for years. It's practically a part of the neighborhood." I folded my arms, refusing to budge. "It's not a road. It's private property, and I have every right to stop people from using it." Nancy let out an exasperated sigh, as if I were the unreasonable one here. "Listen, I'm on the HOA board, and we've always had access to this shortcut. You're causing a huge inconvenience for the entire community. Open the gate." Ah, there it was. The classic HOA power play. "I don't care if you're on the HOA board," I said. "The HOA has no authority over my property. If your neighborhood wants an extra road, maybe you should build one inside your own community." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Clearly, she wasn't used to people saying no to her. Her frustration boiled over, and she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You'll regret this," she spat. "The OA will hear about this, and trust me, you don't want to be on our bad side." I bit back a laugh. "Lady, I don't even belong to your HOA. They have no say over what I do with my land. Nancy's face turned red with anger. We'll see about that, she said through clenched teeth before pulling out her phone and dialing a number. I assumed she was calling another HOA board member to whine about me. But no, Nancy, in all her entitled glory, actually called the police. Now, I've read plenty of stories about HOA nightmares, but I wasn't even prepared for this level of delusion. Did she really think the cops were going to force me to open my own gate? I leaned against the fence, watching as she huffed into the phone. Yes, I need an officer here immediately. This man is blocking a public road. I almost laughed. Did she really think that just saying it was a public road would magically make it true? It didn't take long for a police car to arrive. 2 officers stepped out, looking mildly annoyed to be called out for something so trivial. One of them approached me while the other walked over to Nancy, who immediately launched into a dramatic retelling of events. The officer in front of me glanced at the gate. We got a call about someone blocking a road, he said. What's going on? This is my property, I explained. I put up a gate to stop people from trespassing, but some HOA members think they have the right to use my land as a shortcut. The officer nodded. Do you have any proof this is your property? I was prepared for this. I pulled out a copy of the property deed and a map from the township office, showing the land boundaries. The officer studied them for a moment before nodding again. Yeah, this is pretty clear, he said. This isn't a public road. You're within your rights to block access. I could hear Nancy's voice rising in the background as she argued with the other officer. What do you mean it's private property? We've used this road for years. He can't just cut off access. The officer with me sighed. I'll go explain it to her. I watched as he walked over and calmly informed Nancy that she was trespassing on private property and that I had every legal right to keep the gate closed. Nancy's face turned an even deeper shade of red. This isn't over, she shrieked. You don't know who you're messing with. I just smirked. Sure, Nancy. Whatever you say. The officers eventually got her to leave, though not before she made a dramatic show of stomping back to her car and speeding off like a villain in a low-budget soap opera. I figured that was the end of it, but I should have known better. Less than a week later, I received a letter from the HOA. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss my actions. I couldn't help but laugh as I read it. They really thought they could summon me to some kind of disciplinary hearing over land they didn't even own? Well, if they wanted a fight, I was more than ready to give them one. I wasn't about to waste my time entertaining a bunch of entitled HOA board members, but I also wasn't going to ignore them completely. If they thought they could intimidate me into backing down, they had another thing coming. I decided to attend their little meeting, but not unprepared. I gathered every piece of evidence I had, property deeds, legal documents, security footage of trespassers, and even the footage of Nancy's meltdown when she called the cops. If they wanted to try and pressure me, I was going to make sure they regretted it. The day of the meeting, I arrived at the HOA office, a nondescript building that looked more like a place where bad ideas went to die. As I walked into the meeting room, all eyes turned to me. The long table was filled with HOA board members, most of them middle-aged and wearing expressions of mild disapproval, as if I'd personally inconvenienced each of them. And at the head of the table, sitting like a self-appointed queen, was none other than Nancy, her arms crossed and a smug smirk on her face. I took a seat, leaning back casually. If they thought I was going to be intimidated, they were in for a disappointment. The HOA president, an older man with graying hair and a serious expression, cleared his throat and began. We've called this meeting to discuss your recent actions regarding the fence and gate that have been placed on what we consider to be a crucial access point for our community. I raised an eyebrow. Your community? Last I checked, that land is mine. Nancy scoffed. That land has been used for years as a shortcut into the neighborhood. You can't just close it off because you feel like it. I pulled out my property deed and slid it across the table. Actually, I can, because this land doesn't belong to the HOA. It belongs to me, and I have every legal right to put up a fence to stop trespassers. The president hesitated, glancing at the document. One of the other board members, an older woman who seemed slightly more reasonable, frowned. "Do we actually have jurisdiction over this property?" she asked. Nancy shot her a glare, clearly not appreciating the doubt creeping into her camp. "It doesn't matter. We've used that road for years, and he can't just take it away from us." I smirked. "Actually, that's exactly what I can do. Past use doesn't equal ownership. If that were the case, I'd have claimed half the neighborhood by now just by walking through it." Some of the board members chuckled under their breath, which only made Nancy angrier. "We are willing to be reasonable," the president said, though his tone suggested he thought I was the unreasonable one. "Perhaps we can come to a compromise. If you remove the gate, we can discuss possible compensation for keeping that access point open." I laughed. "So let me get this straight. You're asking me to give up my land so your neighbors can keep trespassing, and in return, you might pay me something?" The president shifted uncomfortably. "Well, when you put it like that, that's because it's ridiculous." I cut in. "There's no compromise here. I own the land and I'm keeping the gate. You have no legal authority over it. So unless you have some sort of actual argument, I think we're done here." Nancy's smug expression had turned into a deep scowl. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice laced with venom. "The HOA has more influence than you think." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "You keep saying that, Nancy. But so far, all I've seen is a lot of whining and zero power. If you really think you can force me to take the gate down, go ahead and try. But just know that I'll fight you every step of the way. And I promise you, I'll win." The room fell silent. The president sighed and rubbed his temples. "Let's adjourn for now. We'll review the legalities and reconvene later." Nancy shot me a glare as I stood up. "This isn't over," she hissed. I gave her a lazy smile. "I sure hope not. I'm having way too much fun watching you lose." And with that, I walked out. But as much as I enjoyed getting under Nancy's skin, I knew she wasn't the type to give up easily. She was going to come at me again. The only question was how far was she willing to go? I knew Nancy wouldn't just walk away from this. People like her don't accept losing, especially when they're used to getting their way. And sure enough, it didn't take long for her to strike back. A few days after the HOA meeting, I received another letter in the mail. It was from the HOA's legal team, or at least that's what they wanted me to believe. The letter was filled with official-sounding threats, warning me that my unauthorized obstruction of a public access point was in violation of community guidelines and that I would face legal consequences if I didn't remove the fence immediately. I almost laughed. For one, I wasn't part of their HOA, so their community guidelines meant absolutely nothing to me. Second, I had already confirmed with my lawyer that there was no public access easement on my property. And third, their so-called legal team wasn't even a real law firm. It was just the HOA's board members trying to sound intimidating. Nice try, Nancy. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash. If they actually had any legal standing, they wouldn't be sending me empty threats. But apparently, my lack of response only fueled Nancy's determination. Over the next week, I started noticing strange things happening around my property. First, one of my security cameras was mysteriously damaged. It wasn't broken completely, just turned at an odd angle, as if someone had messed with it. Then, I found tire tracks near the gate, deeper than usual, like someone had tried to force their way through. Coincidence? Maybe. But then, one night, my motion detector lights flashed on, and when I checked the footage, I saw a group of people standing near my fence. I didn't recognize them, but they were clearly from the HOA neighborhood. They stood there for a while, talking, pointing at the gate, occasionally glancing around like they didn't want to be seen. Now, I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but this was suspicious as hell. The next morning, I checked my mailbox and found another letter this time. It wasn't from the HOA. It was a notice from the county stating that they had received a complaint about an unpermitted structure on my property. Nancy had actually tried to go through local government to get my fence removed. I wasted no time calling the county office and explaining the situation. The clerk I spoke to was polite, but told me they had to investigate any complaints they received. I wasn't worried, though I had all the permits and legal documentation to prove my fence was perfectly legal. Sure enough, after a quick review, the county dismissed the complaint. Nancy had lost again, but I knew she wasn't done. About a week later, I got a call from my lawyer. Apparently, Nancy had escalated things even further. She had actually hired a lawyer of her own and was planning to take me to court. Her claim? That the HOA had a historical right to use the access point, and my fence was illegally obstructing a recognized community easement. I let out a long sigh. This woman just would not quit. My lawyer reassured me that her case was weak. There was no official easement recorded on my property deed, and the HOA had zero legal claim over my land. The most they could do was waste my time and money, trying to drag me into a pointless legal battle. And that's when I decided I'd had enough. It was time to flip the script. I reached out to a local news station that had covered stories about HOA overreach before. I sent them a summary of what was happening, along with photos of my property, the security footage of people snooping around my fence, and the ridiculous letters I'd received. To my surprise, they were very interested. A few days later, I found myself sitting in front of a camera, explaining how an overzealous HOA was trying to bully me into giving up my own land. I made sure to mention how I'd followed every legal requirement, how the county had already dismissed their complaints, and how this was just a power-hungry board member throwing a tantrum because she couldn't get her way. When the segment aired, it blew up. The response was overwhelming. People started calling out the HOA online, questioning their behavior. Even members of their own community began speaking out, saying they didn't support what Nancy was doing. And then, the best part, Nancy called me. But this time, she wasn't yelling. "I saw the news," she said, her voice much quieter than before. I may have overreacted." I almost dropped my phone in shock. Was this the same woman who had been threatening me for weeks? She went on, saying that after seeing the public backlash, the HOA had started receiving complaints not from me, but from their own residents. Apparently, people were furious that HOA money was being wasted on a personal vendetta. And just like that, Nancy backed down. Shortly after, I received another letter from the HOA this time, an official apology. They admitted that they had no legal right to the land and confirmed that they would no longer pursue any action against me. Even better, the letter mentioned that Nancy had been advised to step down from the board. I never saw her again after that. The road stayed blocked, the gate stayed up, and my land was finally, completely, mine. It was a battle I never expected to fight, but in the end, it was worth it. Because if there's one thing I learned from this whole mess, it's this: never let entitled people walk all over you, especially not on your own land.